This critical EDH video is brought to you by Doot Loot, your one-stop shop for Japanese and Russian foils. If you spend $100 or more, you'll earn free entry into the largest online CEDH league this month. So don't miss out and upgrade your deck's bling today.
What's going on, everyone? Merry Christmas Eve. This is a video I've been meaning to record for a really long time and am just finally getting around to it. So if you listen to Keeping Tabs, you'll know that for a while I was playing John Dargo after my time playing Timna Dargo, and this is not a list that a ton of people played post-doc side bans. I think a lot of people kind of gave up on the list, and that doesn't really make a ton of sense to me. I think there's a lot of really powerful stuff that John gives Dargo, and I would argue from like a pure explosivity and raw power perspective, it's probably the most powerful color combination that you have for Dargo. It loses some of the resilience or we'll say agency that silences and some of the other things you get from being in Mardu. And obviously we know that Mardu Dargo had a really, really powerful year performance-wise from people like Kellen and Sylvie. So all that said, I want to spend some time today talking about my John Dargo list, why it's structured the way that it is, and how to approach playing the deck. We'll look at all the different packages from creatures, what very little interaction there is, rituals, all those kinds of things. And then we'll look at some test hands and we'll go from there. So there is a primer. You're more than welcome to check it out. I tried to make this as detailed as possible with some pros, cons, and breakdowns of how to approach different game phases and what you're really looking for as far as winning the game and how the combos in the deck work. So it's pretty thorough. There are some combos in here that are no longer part of the deck, but at least they'll be available for you to review should you choose to add them back in. So all that said, let's take a look at the commanders. So we'll look at Rayhan first because she is like mostly just there for colors, but there's actually some use cases where Rayhan is super relevant and gets overlooked, and there's enough of an incentive to run her specifically over Ikra, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But Rayhan enters the battlefield with 3 1/1 counters on it, and whenever a creature you control dies or is put into the command zone, if it had 1 or more 1/1 counters on it, you may put that many 1/1 counters on target creature. Why is this useful? Well, outside of the fact that it's just food for Dargo, which is like always kind of relevant, we run Agatha's Soul Cauldron, which is right here. So we all know what this does, but just to read through it, you may spend mana as though we're mana of any color to activate abilities of creatures you control. Creatures you control with 1/1 counters on them have all activated abilities of all creature cards exiled with Agatha's Soul Cauldron. Exile target card from a graveyard. When a creature card is exiled this way, put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control. So let's think about how this works really quick. When you cast Rayhan, she enters with 3 1/1 counters on her. If you already have access to cards exiled under Agatha's Soul Cauldron, then Rayhan innately has those characteristics or those abilities because of the fact that she enters with 1/1 counters on her. And then if you do something like, let's say, Tinderwall, with Agatha's Soul Cauldron, and you have Rayhan out, you have a second, you have an immediate access to Tinderwall with Rayhan. Then also something that's kind of crazy is if you put a 1/1 counter on Dargo, let's say, and then Dargo becomes a Tinderwall, and then you sacrifice Dargo with Tinderwall's ability to generate 2 red, you can move the 1/1 counter from Dargo onto another creature that you have and then sacrifice that creature to also have Tinderwall. And you can kind of just create this like giant exponential ritual where you're turning all of your creatures into Tinderwalls and generating lots and lots of red mana. So it's super powerful. Obviously, the fact that you can very easily end up with 2 Razakats is really powerful. Or even 2 Selvalas, or multiple Wild Cantors, multiple Gilded Gooses. Like there's all sorts of crazy stuff that Rayhan and Agatha's Soul Cauldron enables you to do. So that's the main reason that I think she's a lot more relevant than Ikra is in the command zone, and is something to consider when you're making that decision for playing John with Dargo. And Dargo is a card that I think at this point everyone understands, but we'll just read it quickly. As an additional cost to cast the spell, you may sacrifice any number of artifacts and or creatures. The spell costs 2 generic less to cast for each permanent sacrificed this way, and 2 generic less to cast for each other artifact or creature you sacrifice this turn. So something that people who don't play Dargo get confused by is the fact that it says permanent in the text box. Each permanent sacrificed this way is referring specifically to number of artifacts and or creatures sacrificed as part of his cost. So sacrificing a fetch land, for example, doesn't apply to Dargo cost reduction, unless, because of this stupid card, you have Earthbent the land and it is now a creature. So there are some things to think about or consider from Avatar that this deck actually got a lot of upgrades from, in my point of view. So that's our commanders. Dargo is obviously a fundamentally broken magic card who serves as a battery or this kind of like ability to power really explosive stuff, namely through cards like Sacrifice, Burnt Offering, and Metamorphosis. So Metamorphosis is a green or Jund specific card. I think they probably run it in Temur Dargo too, but you can sacrifice a creature to add any amount of mana equal to its casting cost plus 1 to your mana pool, and that can be spent on creatures. So in this case, you spend 1 mana to cast Dargo, you spend 1 mana to cast Metamorphosis, and you now have 8 mana, which is conveniently how much Razaketh costs to cast. So really easy to convert Dargo into a Razaketh, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail. And then obviously there's Sacrifice and Burnt Offering, which are no different than the Mardu Dargo equivalents, and those are primarily used to fuel things like Peer into the Abyss and Ad Nauseum, wherever that is right here. So Dargo can be best thought of as a battery. He's similar to Rograk in the fact that he is a very cheap thing that enables very explosive play patterns, but a little bit, the barrier to entry is a little bit higher, right? You need to have things to sacrifice to Dargo to get his cost reduced. But then once you do that, you have all sorts of really, really powerful ways to convert Dargo into a win attempt or multiple win attempts in a turn. So super powerful. Let's look at the creature package. So one of the strongest reasons to play green with Dargo, Jund specifically, is you get access to the mana dorks. So if you look at like Sylvia's list or your Kellen's list for Mardu Dargo now, there's a really high emphasis on these one drop creatures that either generate mana via creating treasures when they die in Mardu, or serve some sort of other purpose, like Mardu Devotee being a mana filter. And usually most Mardu lists are running 8 to 9 1-drops. If you look at our package here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So we're a little bit higher on the 1-drop creatures, but I think there's a really good reason for that. And that is just this deck is trying to move really fast. Its ideal window is turn 2, and it's all but guaranteed to win on turn 3. I think it is more consistently able to push on turn 2 than Rogsai is. And the downfall is obviously Jund isn't interactive. So what you lose in agency through your interaction, you have to gain in speed, and these 1-drops really help with that. And then we get, I think the most powerful 1-drops that we get in Jund specifically are Orcish Lumberjack, where you can sacrifice Forest to add 3 mana in any combination of red and or green. So that's kind of a super ritual. And then if you combine Orcish Lumberjack with Badgermole Cub, not only are you sacrificing a land to generate 3 mana, you've also probably tapped that land for an extra mana because of Badgermole Cub's ability, and then when you sacrifice that land that's been Earthbent, it's going to come back to the battlefield anyway, and because it's now a creature, it helps reduce Dargo's cost. So Orcish Lumberjack is incredibly powerful. Tinderwall is absolutely broken for Dargo. For 1 green, you can sacrifice it to add 2 red mana to your mana pool. And like we already talked about with Agatha Soul Cauldron, there's a lot of unique synergies that you can lean into with Tinderwall. And the fact that this is not summoning 6, same with Wild Cantor, you can just immediately cast and then sacrifice that for a Dargo reduction of 2. but also a generation of at least 1 mana after the fact allows you to go off pretty easily. Then we have just normal green mana dorks like Elves of Deep Shadow, Ignoble Hierarch, Birds of Paradise, Llanowar Elves. And then I think one that's specifically worth mentioning is Gilded Goose. Gilded Goose is absurd in Dargo because Dargo sees the sacrifice of the food token to add 1 mana of any color, which reduces his cost by 2, generates a mana. Then you can sacrifice the Gilded Goose to reduce him by 2 again. You already have cost reduction of 4, so Dargo will only cost 3 mana, one of which you've generated just off sacrificing the food. And if you choose to run Cabbage Merchant alongside Gilded Goose, then you are just, I mean, Cabbage Merchant in Dargo is busted. You can see that I'm not on that right now just because I think it's a little bit slow for what the deck is trying to do, but it is super powerful. One card that is present in Gen Dargo, almost all Gen Dargo lists that you really don't see in Mardu Dargo anymore, is Warren Soul Trader. And I think one of the reasons for that is the fact that we can tap our dorks for generating mana, and then you can sacrifice them to Warren Soul Trader to generate a treasure token, also increase your sacrifice count for Dargo, and then you can sacrifice the treasure token that Warren Soul Trader gives you to both generate mana and further reduce the cost of Dargo. So that's something that's really powerful. And then when you add in Rakdos to Muscle, or Bergie, or any of these other looping kind of effects with Warren Soul Trader, you can do some really powerful stuff. So another card that's worth mentioning in the creature package is Selvala. So we'll read Selvala really quick. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield, its controller may draw a card if its power is greater than each other creature's power. Tap, pay green and tap her to add X mana in any combination of colors where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. So this is just broken with Dargo because Dargo is 99.99% of the time going to be the largest creature on the battlefield, which means that you're going to be able to draw a card whenever you're looping Dargo, and this is a May ability, which is really powerful. So you don't have to continue to draw your cards, and you don't deck yourself. And then it's just a super ritual where you can pay 1 to tap Selvala to generate 7 mana. And then from there, it's very easy to convert that into any number of meaningful wins. There's a really fun interaction with Spider Manifestation and Spider Punk in this list. So Spider Manifestation is basically another Bergie. It's a 2-drop for a generic and a hybrid Gruul. It taps for either red or green, and whenever you cast a spell with mana value 4 or greater, untap this creature. So as you continue to cast Dargo, Spider Manifestation can untap itself and then serve as, just like Bergie does, an ability to continue to generate a red mana every time that you cast Dargo, making it so that you can continue to cast him as long as you have a way to sacrifice Dargo to continue to reduce its cost. That's something that I think most people know, but it's very important to note that Dargo does see himself get sacrificed. So as you're looping Dargo, his cost continues to be reduced by 2, which is really powerful. But the fun interaction with Spider Manifestation and Spider Punk is Spider Punk gives other spiders you control Riot, which means that you can give your other spiders either a 1/1 counter or haste, I think. Haste is really the only important part. It's very easy to cast a Spider Punk and then cast a Spider Manifestation, have Spider Manifestation enter with haste, and then you have another way to start looping Dargo there. Spider Punk also has the added benefit of being one of the only pseudo-silence effects, and because this deck is trying to push on turn 2 and sometimes turn 3, you don't have to worry as much about getting flashed over the top of when you just give somebody the ability for their spells not to be countered. So it's a really powerful interaction there. Orc Bowmasters is just generically good in Dargo, any black Dargo list, because it gives you 2 bodies for the cost of 2 mana, which is Dargo reduction of 4 right out of the gates, and also has the added benefit of being able to remove trouble pieces, things like Dranith. Obviously, this deck doesn't really have a way to win through Dranith Magistrate because the whole thing relies on Dargo. And also helps just control the board and remove pieces from there. I think most people know how Technomancer and Deadpool interact at this point, but something that I run into really frequently is that you'll cast Technomancer and people are like, oh, he's winning right now. It's infinite mana. And Technomancer by itself doesn't actually make infinite mana at all. You need the ability to convert, or rather copy Technomancer, which is what Deadpool is used for. This deck doesn't have any other Technomancer copy effects. Usually in other Dargo lists, you'll see at least 2 total. In our case, we just have Deadpool. I think that it's a secondary win condition. It feels a little bit slow and clunky, and sometimes I've really strongly considered cutting it. There is one interaction worth noting here where Ruthless Technomancer, Deadpool work together very well with Nature's Rhythm. And so the way that this works is if you sacrifice Dargo to Ruthless Technomancer and generate your 7 treasures, recast Dargo for one of those treasures, you can then, let me walk this back. You'll use Nature's Rhythm to get Technomancer in the first place. This is very easy to do when you use one of your Dargo rituals, like Sacrifice or Burnt Offering, or even Culling Ritual is super powerful here to generate the sufficient mana you need to get Technomancer. Once you have Technomancer, you ETB, sacrifice Dargo, make 7 treasures, and then you can harmonize Nature's Rhythm from the graveyard, tapping Dargo to reduce the cost or pay the harmonized cost of Nature's Rhythm to then tutor Deadpool. So Nature's Rhythm is a 1-card win condition in the deck, which is super powerful and gives you a really reliable way to get to your Technomancer Deadpool loops. Once you have infinite mana presented from Technomancer Deadpool, you have an ability to win in the same way that a Fairy Mastermind loop wins, where you can draw out everybody and the whole sequence only uses activated abilities, and you have infinite mana at that point, so you can continue to activate the abilities no matter what they draw. The way this works is that the last time when you end the loop, you end Deadpool without trading a text box, and then you just pay 3 mana that you generated from your infinite loop, sacrifice Deadpool to make each other player draw a card. Obviously, along the way to doing this, you can continue to reanimate Deadpool with Technomancer and steal every other relevant creature's text box on the battlefield. And just continue to sacrifice Deadpool as part of cost as you're looping Dargo. And then you have the ability to wipe the board of any relevant effects as well, which is really, really strong. Rakdos the Muscle is this kind of a secret commander Rakdos deck where if you get Rakdos the Muscle in a way to sacrifice Dargo, in a way to generate mana, it's one of my favorite win conditions in the deck because notably Rakdos targets, so you can target every other player to exile their entire deck, and then you can either choose to win with a win condition that you've exiled from them, or at that point you can just pass to their upkeeps and they can die by drawing the card. So Rakdos is really strong, and Jund Dargo is primarily known for Razaketh. So like we already talked about with Metamorphosis, being able to generate 8 mana to hard cast Razaketh, you also have the ability to Birthing Pod Dargo into Razaketh, which is one of the easiest ways to win on turn 2, most reliable, as long as you have the ability to generate mana, sufficient food to reduce Dargo's cost, and the ability to then sacrifice Dargo to Birthing Pod to put Razaketh into play. Once you have Razaketh into play, as long as you can cast Dargo one more time, the game's over, presuming no interaction. And we'll walk through some of these lines in Moxfield a little bit later on. So that is, I think, kind of the important notes of the creature package. There's a lot to cover here, and there's a lot of ways that these cards overlap with each other. Double Spirit Guide, also extremely powerful. That's something really nice that Jund gives us for those early pushes when you just need another mana. I think the strongest card that we got from Avatar was definitely Badger Mole Cub. Cabbage Merchant is ridiculous in the deck, but I think if you're relying on Cabbage Merchant, if you didn't cast it on turn 1, it's probably not going to give you enough bang for your buck to actually convert it into a win. So something to think about. Let's talk about the Sorcery package. So a card that is one of the only interactive elements in the deck is Claim the Firstborn. So Claim the Firstborn is a 1 red to gain control of target creature with mana value 3 or less. That creature gains haste until end of turn. So this is something that you can use to steal someone's Drannith Magistrate that's locking you out of the game, and then sacrifice that Drannith to Dargo to then go off and win the game. There's others, or you could steal someone's Ranger Captain, crack the Ranger Captain, and win under a silence. Lots of powerful things you can do with other people's creatures. But this also, very importantly, can target your own creatures and give them haste. So giving Selvala haste right out of the gates, Spider Manifestation haste right out of the gates. These are really, really powerful things that you can do, giving Lumberjack haste right out of the gates. Like all of that is something that's going to allow you to convert on the spot rather than have to pass and lose your window, because this deck needs to operate so quickly because it doesn't have the ability to interact on the stack very well. It's very important to be able to convert right on the spot. So Claim the Firstborn is useful for that. Gamble is just a generically good tutor, especially when we're running Soul Cauldron, Shifting Woodland, because you don't necessarily care if you pitch a card to the graveyard. In some cases, you even want it to. This is also obviously an Underworld Breach deck, so Gamble becomes a way to convert Breach as well. So Imperial Seal, generically good black tutor. There are actually a number of people who aren't running it because it's sorcery speed and doesn't allow you to access the card until the subsequent turn, which sometimes in this deck is not where you want to be. But I do think the ability to Imperial Seal on turn 1 and then open up a window for yourself on turn 2 is too good to not run. Infernal Plunge, a great ritual. It reduces the cost of Dargo because it sacrifices a creature as part of the cost, adds 3 red mana. It's just very, very good. We've talked about Metamorphosis. This deck has a number of good reanimation targets, primarily in Rakdos and Razaketh. But even if you lose a Technomancer on the stack to a Force of Will or something like that, you have the ability to go again. So Reanimate is just generically good in the list. Sometimes I will say that just the play pattern of Entomb, Reanimate, Razaketh doesn't always work out very well for you because you don't have the ability to reduce Dargo's cost sufficiently to then chain tutors into Razaketh. You just have an 8/8 flyer on the board that is a rod for removal. Rite of Flame, generically good ritual. Demonic Council is a great card in the deck because at its floor it gets 2 of our greatest win conditions, which are Rakdos and Razaketh, but also because of cards like Stitcher's Supplier and Altar of Dementia and Altar of the Wretched. The likelihood of having Delirium to turn this into just a second Demonic Tutor is very high, especially once you're in the middle of a breach line or anything like that. So the floor of this card is much higher than it is in other decks. Demonic Tutor, Diabolic Intent just don't really need to be talked about. Very powerful. Life's Legacy is another one of the reasons to run green alongside Dargo, in that you draw cards equal to the sacrifice creature's power when you sacrifice a creature as part of its cost. So you draw 7 cards with Dargo. If for some reason you were in a pinch and sacrificed Razaketh as part of the cost, which I wouldn't do, but worst case, you're drawing 8 cards there. It's pretty good. Nature's Rhythm, we've already talked about being a 1-card win condition with Deadpool and Technomancer, but it's also really good to just go get things like Selvala or Razaketh or Rakdos or whatever you need to have a win. Soul Trader is another great target for Tutor here. It's a very flexible card. It's very powerful. Eldritch, primarily used to turn Dargo into Razaketh, but you can tutor for anything that you might need. Yawgmoth's Will gives us the ability to go again, and especially if you do things like sacrifice a Lotus Petal, a Chrome Mox, a Mana Vault, Mopal, any of these very low-cost rocks as part of the cost of Dargo. Yawgmoth's Will allows you to bring them back to the battlefield to push again on another turn, which is something that sometimes is really important because we can fall over to so many pieces of interaction. Culling Ritual is a broken magic card in our format. It generates unbelievable amounts of mana and also can open the window for you to push. So I think I would be hard-pressed not to run this card. Peer into the Abyss is like a Dargo staple. It obviously has the horrendous trade-off of being able to be deflecting swatted, which can be a huge bummer. But if a Peer into the Abyss resolves, you're winning the game. And because this is just like the turbo deck to end all turbo decks, it's worth the cost or risk associated with potentially getting that swatted or countered or what have you. Something else that Jund gives you, so I think that's a pretty, concise but sufficient coverage of the sorcery package. Jund gives you access to crop rotation, which is really powerful in a deck that does run Gaia's Cradle. And the reason for that, a lot of people think that this is maybe a trap, and I think it can be, because you can definitely have mulligans that don't work out in your favor because of the fact that Gaia's Cradle then doesn't tap for any mana because you don't have the ability to just cast Roderick from the command zone to guarantee that it's available. But at its floor, presuming it taps for at least 1 mana, Gaia's Cradle becomes kind of a free ritual that's tapping usually for 2 to 3, sometimes even 4 mana in this list. And that can be the difference between being able to push and not being able to push. So crop rotation for Gaia's Cradle is really strong, but our only access to a flash speed win in the deck is Emergent Zone. So obviously Emergent Zone, you can pay 1, sacrifice it, and cast spells this turn instead they had flash. And crop rotation gives you access to that at instant speed, so it's something that you can sit on and win on the stack when otherwise you wouldn't be able to do that. And that's something that is available in Jund that's not available in other decks. This also has a really favorable interaction with Necropotence in the sense that if you hit crop rotation off your Necropotence and don't hit Emergent Zone, you're able to then convert on the spot at flash speed in your end step. Really, the only other way we have a way of converting a very large Necro Rip is Final Fortune. Even then, you're not really converting on the spot. You're just moving to your next turn. So crop rotation is extremely powerful. All the ritual effects, Black Rituals, Coin the Weak, Dark Ritual, Sacrifice, Burnt Offering, Cabal Ritual, and then a new Avatar edition that is extraordinarily strong is Last Agni Kai. This card at its floor generates 6 mana and also removes whatever you want to remove on the battlefield because you're going to have Dargo when you cast it. And it also has the added benefit of not needing to sacrifice Dargo as part of its cost. So it's very easy to have 2 mana left over after casting Dargo to then generate 6 mana, and that is conveniently enough to cast Birthing Pod and activate Birthing Pod. And from there, you are off to the races. I have won many, many games specifically off of the play pattern of cast Dargo, cast Last Agni Kai, cast Birthing Pod, win game. This card is insane. And then, of course, we're running Ad Nauseam, which if we look at our Ad Naus value, it's 1.48, which is, not as low as Farm, but is still within the range of acceptable. And because we don't have draw engines, like we don't even have Esper Sentinel, right? We have only our mass draw effects, which are Ad Nauseam, Life's Legacy. You can kind of almost treat Rakdos the Muscle as a mass draw effect. Razaketh, sort of, kind of, but not really. And then you have Altar of the Wretched, Necropotence, and Greater Good are kind of our main means of accessing a greater number of cards than we have in our starting hand. But because we're trying to push on turn 2 or turn 3, realistically, you're not going to see very many cards. You're probably going to see your starting hand plus 2 to 3 without resolving a mass draw effect. So these cards are crucial. Really, the only interactive elements in our instant package are Lightning Bolt and Veil of Summer. Veil of Summer is just a very, very powerful green card. It's kind of the closest thing we have to a Silence. And it also is a cantrip for what it's worth, which isn't necessarily very much, but is a great magic card. And then Lightning Bolt is primarily here for removing stacks pieces like Dranic Magistrate, because again, the deck really cannot win without it. Or, I'm sorry, cannot win with a Drannith on the battlefield. Tainted Pact, just generically good. It's a tutor in this deck. there are many, many cases where you have half of an A plus B combo and you don't really care what you lose on the way with Tainted Pact, and so long as you're able to get to the other side of that combo and win the game there. This is absolutely a full send all the time deck. You don't often have a backup plan or even time or ability to push a second time. So you just have to be willing to rip it, and Tainted Pact can get you there. Sometimes with it, Nals, you just, you hit pure Razaketh and Rakdos as your first three cards, and, variant sucks, and that is what it is. But that happens. That's okay. You're going to win far more games resolving an Oz than games that you're going to lose because of it. Look at our artifact package. It's not really very unique. We've talked a fair bit about Agatha's Soul Cauldron and how powerful it is with our dorks and other such things. I talk about some of the combo lines with Soul Cauldron and Tinderwall and Great Henge in the primer, even though Great Henge is no longer in the deck. It is something really strong that you can do. So other than that, we really have the kind of staple free mana rocks. Obviously, again, it's a breach deck, so we have Lion's Eye Diamond. Also, Lion's Eye Diamond plus Shifting Woodland is something that can present wins once you've mulled down to like 3, 4, and 5 pretty easily, which is something to look out for because you can pitch your hand to generate 3 mana and then use that 3 mana plus Shifting Woodland to then make Shifting Woodland the copy of whatever you put into the graveyard when you've cracked Lion's Eye Diamond. So really powerful, favorable interaction there. A lot of people are running Bolas' Citadel for that reason, because it's pretty easy to turn your Shifting Woodland into a Citadel, and we're only on 23 lands. From there, there are very, very few cards in this deck that can cause you to just brick on Citadel outside of a land. In Mardu Dargo, I bricked a ton on Citadel, and it kind of gave me PTSD, so I'm not running it, but I think it's a very strong choice, specifically because of the fact that you can use Shifting Woodland with it very easily. Mox Diamond, Mox Opal, Mana Vault, Soul Ring, Signet, Grim Monolith, all just a way to generate lots of mana, which is super important. They're also food for Dargo. Prize Statue is a staple Dargo card at this point. When it ETBs, makes a treasure. Then you can sacrifice that treasure to generate a mana, sacrifice Prize Statue as part of the cost for a Dargo reduction of 4, and having generated mana, and then when you sacrifice Prize Statue, you get another treasure token. So then that allows you to cast something like Sacrifice after the fact to generate the mana you need to present a win. Wishclaw Talisman has the added benefit of being Dargo food, but primarily you're using it just as a tutor. Vexing Bauble is one of the few forms of protection that we have. It's also food for Dargo if you really, really need it. Altar of the Wretched is one of my favorite Magic cards. It was printed, basically specifically for Dargo, in my opinion. It reads as a draw 7, mill 7, which fuels your breach or just allows you to keep going. It's important to note that a very common play pattern with Altar of the Wretched is to sacrifice Dargo to it, then cast Dargo, sacrifice Altar of the Wretched as part of the cost of sacrificing Dargo, and then you can see this second line or bottom line of text is you can return Altar of the Wretched from your graveyard to your hand for a black and 2 generic. So it's pretty easy to generate sufficient mana to continue looping Altar of the Wretched and draw 14, 21 cards, basically see almost your entire deck, which is really, really good. If you can't convert off of that, we have other problems. Relic of Legends is obviously a way to loop Dargo, in that you can tap Dargo into Relic of Legends to add 1 mana, and then sacrifice Dargo to Altar of Dementia or any of your other sacrifice outlets to then recast Dargo, tap Dargo into Relic of Legends, add 1 mana of any color, and continue looping Dargo that way. Like we've already talked about, something that's great about Jund is you have not only Bergian Relic, but you also have Spider Manifestation, and to a lesser extent, Selvala, as ways to generate lots and lots of mana off of looping Dargo. We've talked about Birthing Pot a lot. It's probably the best way to win the game in Jund Dargo, and it gets Razaketh and you win. Once you have Razaketh, a really common way to win the game is to sacrifice Dargo to tutor for Lion's Eye Diamond, cast Lion's Eye Diamond, sacrifice Lion's Eye Diamond for 3 red mana, pitch your hand to the graveyard, then go grab Underworld Breach, and then from there it's pretty trivial to win most of the time. But you can really assemble your own win condition off of Razaketh and take it whichever direction that you would like to go, which is pretty freaking cool. Looking at our enchantments, we've talked a lot about Underworld Breach. You don't have, obviously, we're not in blue, so you don't have Brain Freeze, but you do have Altar of Dementia and Relic and Birdie to make it so that you can mill your entire deck, and then also mill everyone else's decks. And from there, pretty easy to win. You do have the ability, we are not on Wheel of Fortune, but you do have the ability to make everyone else draw a card with Deadpool without stealing a text box. So you are able to win on the spot once you mill everyone else out, which is really great. Necropotence in Dargo should be thought of more as a way to see 2 hands worth of cards in Sculpt. My play pattern here with Necro usually is to see 14 cards, activating Necropotence 14 times, and then sculpt down a perfect hand that tries to present at least 1, if not multiple win attempts on the subsequent turn. But like I said, we do have the added benefit of being able to crop rotation for Emergence Zone, which can give you a flash speed win on your end step, which is not something that we're able to do in other Dargo color combinations. Greater Good is another really powerful win condition in the deck, where if you have a means of looping Dargo with mana generation like Burgie or Relic, you can then sacrifice a creature to draw cards equal to the sacrificed creature's power and discard 3 cards. So draw 7, discard 3. You can draw your entire deck or very close to your entire deck while fueling your graveyard for an Underworld Breach line as you continue looping Dargo through with Greater Good. So super strong. And then another, probably my favorite card in the deck is Pattern of Rebirth. This is an aura that enchants a creature, and when that creature is put into a graveyard from play, that creature's controller may search his or her library for a creature card and put that card into play. And what does this do? You guessed it, it gets Razaketh. It also can get Rekdos, or Technomancer, or Soul Trader, or anything you need to win the game. And you can very easily, obviously, sacrifice the creature that is enchanted with Dargo to put yourself in a winning position immediately. So for that reason, some people run Protean Hulk because you have the sack outlet in the command zone to sacrifice Hulk and get your winning Hulk pile. I'm just not personally a huge fan of that. And if you think about kind of what it entails, a lot of the time you need a way to put Hulk on the battlefield, and then you need a way to recast Dargo again to sacrifice Protean Hulk to get your winning pieces. And at that point, if you already have the ability to recast Dargo multiple times and a way to put a creature into play, I think you're already winning the game in a way that's probably even more resilient or just as resilient as Protean Hulk, and you don't have to run cards that are kind of dead on their own. So that's something that I just wanted to touch on there. The land package is pretty standard for a Jund Turbo deck. We do have Cradle. I don't think you have to run Cradle. It's kind of a trap because it makes some hands a little bit unkeepable. But I think its ceiling is high enough that it's just generically good and is worth running. Shifting Woodland is like one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful cards in green right now, especially for a deck that wants to put so many things into the graveyard. You can make Shifting Woodland a copy of Technomancer to make your Technomancer loop happen that way. And then you just continue to sacrifice the original Technomancer as you cast and loop Dargo, and then use Technomancer's second ability still on Shifting Woodland to reanimate the original Technomancer, generate infinite mana, et cetera, et cetera. So really absurdly strong way to win the game, and because it's an activated ability on the land, it's very difficult to interact with, and it's something that you can activate multiple times in a row to just stop whatever stack interaction is happening in its tracks. So that's kind of an overview of the deck and the cards within the deck. I think I'm just going to release this video as it is, um, and then we can do a subsequent video that talks about hands and mulligans and play patterns and stuff like that. But this at least gives you an overview and some of the why I've thought about the deck the way that I have and why certain cards are in the list or not in the list, and hopefully gives you an idea of where to go from here. So we have the link to the deck will be in the description. Obviously, there's the primer that we've already talked about, which is a pretty in-depth way to learn how to play the deck and covers most of the things that I just talked about in this video, and will hopefully get you guys off to the races. So if you have any questions at all, if you want a follow-up video on mulligans and play patterns and, just walking people through how to actually play the deck, I'd be more than happy to do that. But hopefully this is something that y'all can chew on over Christmas and consider for if and when you would like to add John Dargo to your rotation. So thank you all so much for watching. Thanks for taking the time, and I will talk to y'all later. Cheers.